Hey everybody, this is Jon Croft with Cultural Warfare with Jon Croft, and I'm Jon Croft. How are you doing, Rebecca?
I'm doing great. How are you?
Yay! Doing great. Yeah, it's been a great week this week, and as you know, we've been working a lot on our house and getting ready to sell it. I'm working on a bunch of projects. This week, we are talking about a documentary called Trith Rising from Focus on the Family. And I'm so glad people are willing to talk about this subject more. The one we talk about, which is about culture. It's true that the focus here is about Western civilization and why it's collapsing and what we can do about it. But the great thing is you can see it for free on YouTube. You can see it for free on X. You can go to their website. You can host a screening at your church. And I went to their site. Let me see if I can bring it up here really quick. It is truthrising.com, presented by Focus on the Family and the Colson Center. Choose to see, choose to believe, choose to act. And it says Truth Rising isn't just a documentary, it's a call to action at a critical time in our culture. As faith, identity, and morality are being redefined, this documentary exposes the civilizational moment we are living in. Through powerful stories and expert insights, it reveals how ordinary people can make an extraordinary impact by boldly choosing courage over fear. As the world redefines truth, Truth Rising offers clarity, courage, and a Christ-centered path forward. So this is really great. There's links here. Look, it says Truth Rising the Study. This looks really exciting because this is something that I probably could actually do at our church. It says this study is your next step toward living with intentionality and influence. Truth Rising, the study, is built around four key themes: hope, truth, identity, and calling. This free study equips you to understand the times, ground yourself in God's truth, and step boldly into your role in history and move from awareness to action. So that's really great. There's little videos. Look, it's Chloe Cole. She's also in the movie, who we interviewed a few weeks ago, as well as the filmmaker, Emilio, who's working on a movie for her. So here's some of the speakers. Os Guinness. He's a former Labrie Institute guy. He's been around a while, and I like a lot of his perspective. He really cares about Western civilization, growing up in China, and seeing the destruction of Marxism. He defends Western civilization. John Stonestreet is similar, although he did not have the childhood situation that Os Guinness had, but he is working at the Colson Center. It says he's a sought after speaker and author on areas of faith and culture, theology, worldview, and education and apologetics. And he's on the radio show Breakpoint, which I've never really heard. Maybe I should start listening to it. I'm not sure, but one of his books include a practical guide to culture, and another is called Restoring All Things. So sounds like he's right up my alley with the kind of stuff I talk about here, which is about culture and restoring our culture, which also intersects quite a lot with Western civilizational values. What does that mean? Also, Seth Dillon is in the documentary, Katie Faust, Philippa Stroud, and Ayan Hirsi Ali. And of course, Chloe Cole, as we mentioned, is in it. So this talks about the two nonprofits and lots of questions they can answer here about the documentary as well as the study, which I think is really exciting. So you can watch it on here. As far as I know, you can host a watch party at your church and discuss it. But look, you can see it right here on YouTube. I got it queued up to a clip here. Before we continue on, are there any questions you have, Rebecca?
I don't have any questions about it. No.
Yeah, I know we've talked briefly about it already, and so I think you're probably ready for what it's going to say. You've heard me talk a lot about this kind of stuff anyway, so I think that you're not going to be surprised by a lot of the stuff they're going to say. One thing I'm really before we get into it, one thing I'm really happy about with this movie is that they don't mince words about Marxism. They don't, dance around the subject. Now, I do wish they would just explicitly connect all of those issues to Marxism. But what they do is they not so subtly say Marxism is a problem, very clearly, very directly. And so they kind of appear to be saying that this is the problem, but I think they're not coming to some grand conclusion about it necessarily. They're just kind of saying this appears to be the issue here. Also on a broad level, right? You could say that the issue that maybe was present here before Marxism got here was materialism and humanism, right? And so with materialism and humanism, it's going to make the way for something like Marxism to come in. But I think Marxism has done a really bang up job in making itself well known as the current issue of our day. So I think if we handled Marxism handily, a lot of those other issues would go away, including, I believe, materialism and atheism might even go away because it's been that much of sucking the air out of the room for every nation in the world. It affected everyone on a mass scale, and even Islamic countries. You'd think that a theocracies like Islamic countries would be like, well, this doesn't affect us or whatever. Oh no, it's affected almost every nation on the globe. They're stuck in a conundrum because they don't necessarily want to support the West, but they have to admit that supporting Marxism could be just as detrimental, if not worse, than supporting the West. So, you know, um, we're all stuck in this conundrum with Marxism. We all have to answer this problem. What does materialism really get us? And I would say it ruins our lives, essentially. It's not a way to live as a human being. But let's just go into the documentary then. This is to me, it's an exciting documentary by Focus on the Family. Focus on the Family has had a few issues in the near past, but I think a lot of people have kindly forgiven them for certain things. Obviously, James Dobson passed away recently, so that kind of brought them up into the forefront again of memory. I think that they tried to do a really good job. They have a ministry that we look into quite often, which is called Plugged In, which has to do with reviewing films and giving a gospel-centered kind of view on entertainment. So I think more recently, I think it was just an issue of how to approach some social issues or sexuality issues, and they didn't give a really great answer to that. But then guess what? They apologized and explained, how they should have done better and that they really care about these things. And so I think that really kind of eased a lot of tensions about the future of Focus on the Family. And now here we are with some really great doctrinally sound people that really care about these issues. They tackle wokeism, they tackle transgenderism, they tackle cultural issues, they tackle sexuality, they tackle, just the ideas of Western civilization and why we're giving up on them. And like I said, they tackle Marxism. So I find that really refreshing that they're willing to do all that. I might, like I say, I might actually host a discussion like this at our church. We'll see. After I pray about it, we'll find out if that's going to be what we do. Okay, so first of all, this is more of a discussion about Western civilization than it is about culture. So slight pivot from what I typically talk about. On the other hand, I talk about Western civilization quite often. So I focus on culture, but overlaps quite a bit with the civilizational values. So let's go into Truth Rising. I've queued up at 6 minutes or so. He talks about what is civilization, and after that, we'll get into the current West and what that's like.
Civilizations, I think, are things that over time are passed from generation to generation.
That's Niall
You might
Ferguson.
call them the operating system of a society.
Well, if a civilization is a culture where people share values and ideas and beliefs, and that culture becomes significant enough to be, if you like, recognized historically and in its own time as dominant.
When I look at the world over the last 500 years, it seems to me that we can tell a story in which one complex of ideas and institutions came to be very dominant over the others. Those countries of Western Europe, with a predominantly Christian heritage, had become very distinct in their ways of doing things from the other civilizations that they encountered when they traveled around the world.
Western civilization really born with a lot of influence from the old thinking from the Greco-Roman world, but particularly fused with the very significant insistence that we find in Christianity of respect for a higher authority and the sort of morals that go with it. But also this absolute insistence that every individual has worth, has value, has standing, because they're made in the image of a creator.
The most extraordinary building block and foundation stone of the West is the dignity of every single human being. I mean, that's a profoundly radical thought. Obviously, that came out of the Judeo-Christian foundation, and that truth sent ripples and waves right the way through our civilization. It was the turning point and the foundational building block of everything that we know today.
Very true. Yeah, these fellows are totally accurate. So what do you think about that, honey?
That was really cool. I liked that they were pointing out the value of every individual as being very unique to Western civilization.
Yes. Well, and I think quite aptly put, you could say that it provides balance between community and individual. And I think you're going to see signs of that more in the coming up in this documentary. But that's one thing that the East, I find that if you're going to compare the East to the West, right, the East weighs more heavily on community. The West weighs more heavily on the individual. And I think I'll play some more of this so you'll get to see what I'm talking about. But they're going to talk about the current West, what it's become, right, in the current day. So we started with that nugget of truth, the individual, along with the respect for authority, right? True authority, not false authority, true authority, God's laws, in other words. And but also the great value of the individual and how significant that is.
When Alexis de Tocqueville came to the United States in the early 19th century, he was amazed to see the strength of American local communities. Americans do all these things for themselves. They have associations. When a problem arises, they don't expect the government to come and deal with it. And in his eyes, that was what made American democracy so vibrant, this local associational life. But he also noticed, as Max Weber did later when he came to America, that religion played a pretty important part in knitting America's widely spread out communities together. When I first came to the United States to work, which is now more than 20 years ago, there still seemed a clear difference. Americans seemed more believing and more observant in religious terms than their European counterparts. But that difference is fading, particularly since COVID. American churches start to look quite empty.
I do think our civilization is at tipping point. And I think our options are very limited, but I think we can already see that the alternative fuels that we've tried to put into the great engines of democracy have failed. The great engines really were the Judeo-Christian concepts of accountability to a higher authority, coupled with doing the right thing by your neighbour, loving your neighbour. They've been massively diminished. And in the name of identity now, it's all about me. I am God over my life. I will choose who I will be. My identity is mine. You will be deeply offending me if you dare to challenge that identity. And that fragmentation has made it extremely difficult for leaders in a democracy to appeal to a common good, to a common weal. We're living through a kind of...
I have to agree with that. So I described it before as, right, this balance between community and individual. And as he was stating just now, right, the individual has brought it to the extreme where I'll be deeply offended, right, if you say anything that's against my own personal beliefs. And in other words, the individual is setting themselves then above the community and above some kind of normalcy or consensus within the community about how people should treat each other. And individuals get to be on top of everything, right? They get to be essentially Napoleon putting on their own crown on their own head. They get to be their own God, and they get to be the emperor of their future. And this is what you see. Obviously, there's going to be people, right, who are taken advantage of in this situation. There's going to be people who then are placed on top of the totem pole. These are the individuals that get to run roughshod, right, over others. And in the name of some kind of tolerance, right, or decency. And yet it's contradictory and hypocritical as they run roughshod over other individuals. It becomes now self-defeating, and it becomes hypocritical. It becomes something that is eating itself. This disease, this autoimmune disease that destroys its own body. And so that's what we're seeing now in Western civilization, as the individual value has been set above the community, and the lack of limiting principles on when the individual needs to check their place in society, that principle has escaped, right? That principle has gone out the window, and we don't have that limiting principle now because Christianity was the one creating that balance, putting our own lives under the value of others, setting Christ as the head of the church allows us to create that balance in our own lives. So these are really important points to bring up, but they're going to go on. They're going to talk about wokeism, and they're going to talk about authority or false authority, right? So wokeism, as you can see then, is the disease that comes from individual autonomy that's run roughshod. And false authority then takes the place of the authority we're supposed to follow in a Christian nation or Christian society. So we learn to recognize true authority from that basis.
Yeah. And it seems like what you're saying, like the individual and specifically like the self, like focused on the self doing what they can to make their life better. I was thinking when you were talking, I was thinking about how it's very self-centered. It's very like self-focused on the individual's own needs, personal needs or perceived personal needs, and their own identity, and how that can actually be more burdensome. You know, the reality is that can be more burdensome than this heavenly authority.
Or just being part of this community, just meeting the needs of this community could be less of a burden
Yeah.
than having to reinvent yourself.
Yeah,
know.
putting the needs of others first might actually give you some peace and might actually be a little more freeing
Fulfilling. Yeah,
than
fulfilling and freeing.
than just attending to your the needs of your, toddler-esque identity.
Yeah, amen.
But since the 60s, almost every institution of authority seems to have undergone an internal dissolution and collapse. Certainly it doesn't command respect. Is there anyone who deeply respects the Department of Motor Vehicles, the Internal Revenue Service, the Secret Service, Congress? All the organs of government, all the organs of art, all the organs of culture seem deeply compromised not only by stupidity, by an ideological bias that everyone on earth finds repugnant. That's an interesting question. Why'd that happen? What do we mean when we talk about wokeism? I think the answer is that it's a pseudo religion. Wokeism is a kind of cult. You do strange things like announce your preferred pronouns at the beginning of meetings, which is a kind of weird social innovation. You use cultish language that nobody else uses in the real world, like intersectionality, a word that I think no ordinary American would be able to define.
So now it's cultural communism. It's not about the proletariat, the haves and the have-nots. It's about a dividing society into the oppressor and the oppressed. And the oppressor is the white heterosexual male. Christianity is seen as the religion of the white heterosexual male. Western civilization is seen as the fruits of the white heterosexual male. So there is this campaign to destroy all of that. Radical political Islam finds the West in this state and thinks this is a very easy thing.
Yeah, she's going to talk about Islam because she comes from Somalia, an Islamic country, and she's going to talk about how they're actually taking advantage of this situation with Western wokeness, and to make Europe even more Islamic as well. So they've been smart enough to detect that the woke are weak-minded and can be taken advantage of. And so they're using that opportunity to destroy the West as well. But speaking of destroy, I think that guy who's on the couch, the red couch, he's in Paris, he's named Berlinski, I think. He's a mathematician. He has a cool quote coming up here.
I liked what that one guy said about intersectionality.
Yeah, like we don't even know what that is.
Because it's true. I can't really, I'm not sure how I would define what that word means.
Well, it's like one of these Gnostic religions that you don't even know what they're talking about. They're talking some fake form of knowledge that's supposed to be eye-opening and enlightening somehow, but you really have no idea what these people are talking about. And they think this comes off as intelligent, and most people just look at it like, this is dumb. This is not even useful. So they're going to lose a lot of people with this kind of weird hermetic Gnostic cult-like behavior. People are not going to jive with this. Maybe they will for a year or two, and then the more they do it, the more they're just going to start being like, why? What is this all like? Why do I have to do this? This is so dumb. And the reason you have to is because you're in a cult. You don't really have to get more complicated than that. Cults are weird, and they require weird things from people. And that's because they think what they're doing is valuable. That everybody else is like, you must have drank the Kool-Aid. Like there's no explanation, because I'm not a moron. I can see what you're trying to do here. You're trying to separate people and use that for power dynamics and then gain power through that. It's not really that complicated when you think about it. Well, I like this quote coming up here because it's so simple, but so profound.
It certainly should be a moment of deep reflection, but it's also a moment of danger, because we see what's possible in the unraveling of a civilization. And it's very, very easy to unravel a civilization. A man who could not build a pigsty can nonetheless destroy a chateau. And I think that's true of civilization. People who could not in a million years put together a civilization are perfectly capable of destroying it.
It's such a profound statement, but it's so simple and so true. And if you have kids, you know this is true, right, honey? Some kid builds something with his blocks, and the next kid just comes over and knocks it all over. And sure, he's having fun, but he doesn't realize that the kid who did that work, there's a reason that they're kind of in mourning right now. They're
Yeah, I
like,
think
I just worked for 5 minutes to build this thing, and you just took literally a few seconds to get your
yeah.
jollies and knock this whole thing over. Of course, I teach my kids to relax and just build another one, because that's true also, right? You have to get over this kind of thing. Nevertheless, that guy is absolutely true. It's so easy to just throw a tantrum, be super hypercritical, and destroy an entire civilization that way. And that's what critical theory does. Critical theory is a bunch of academics who think they're smart, but they've never built a civilization, and they probably couldn't even build a house. And here they are tearing apart everything that people have spent thousands of years to build. They're getting their jollies from this. They think this is fun or this is somehow useful, productive. It's not. It's not even useful in the
Well,
slightest.
I feel like right now we really value the critics. We really like, just value someone tearing a movie apart. Um, but
Right. Right.
as this guy was saying, like it's much easier, there's not as much skill involved in tearing something apart than there is in building something up, building something new.
The
So,
funny thing is we spend an inordinate amount of time on the negatives.
mhm.
We should be spending most of our time acknowledging the positives and
Yeah.
saying, who am I to criticize these negative things? Because I probably couldn't make half as good of a film as this filmmaker. And similarly with all these other things, right? The things people build and they spend so much time building, like, first of all, why do I think as a critic that a film deserves to be criticized because it's not perfect? Why would we assume it should be perfect? That by itself, people should think about, because it's an absurd thought to think that a nation or a civilization or a film could be perfect is absurd. So critical people have to turn the tables on themselves, steel man the other side, steel man the other argument, and say, why would you assume this should be a perfect civilization? That's absurd. Of course it's not perfect. We're
Mhm.
not God, and neither are you, right, Mr. Critic? So it's really absurd to be so critical as to think that just because you can point out something imperfect, it means it shouldn't exist anymore. No, in fact, I think point it out to acknowledge the humanity, acknowledge how like you are to this civilization, also an imperfect person, and find things to be grateful for, right? Find things. This is Christianity. This is what Christianity does to you. It makes you realize that I might be a quadriplegic, but I can be useful to the Lord and I can enjoy my life. And that's the truth. It's not some kind of fluffy thing people say. There's nothing fluffy about that, actually. That's a serious thing to consider, that a quadriplegic could be a useful person. And if that use is just enjoying your life and enjoying the day that you're in, that's useful, actually. You could brighten somebody's day through that. You could acknowledge a poem or write your own poem. Like, you can do a lot of things. And why talk about what you can't do when you can just accomplish something? So these are kind of simple, basic things that every child needs to learn, for example, when they're growing up. And the fact that we haven't been teaching them this from this perspective, and instead we've been teaching them through critical theory and these critical theorists about the imperfections of Western civilization, is really shameful. It's shameful that we've allowed these kind of negative naysayers to fill our institutions of learning and education, learning is not about destroying things. It's about learning how to build things. And obviously, things were not created perfectly in the past. So when you build things, you can learn how it was imperfect to build something better. But it's not about destroying that thing. It's about recognizing its value, right? And then as you build in the future, you can make something even better. But why resent the foundation you're building upon? That just doesn't make sense. Appreciate it, right? Otherwise, you couldn't be where you're at right now to build something new. So there's so many great things to learn when you think about these subjects. One thing I like one of the contributors in this. They've got great contributors in this documentary, but they got the guy from Mumford and Sons. I think his name is Winston Marshall from the UK. He's pretty cool. He's got a cool podcast.
The job of the artist is to tell the truth. I couldn't continue having been part of this lie, and I also knew that the truth could be damaging to the band professionally. And so it seemed that the only way forward was for me to retract my apology, stand by what I'd originally said, and to save them the trouble, move away from the band.
Do you see this radical, in this case, Marxism with BNN, as a wider problem with European young people?
Absolutely. This is the most evil ideology that Europe has ever come up with. It's more evil than Nazism because it killed more people. Some reason we have not educated our children on Marxism. I wonder how many kids really even know about Mao. Marxism is the opposite of, it's anti-human, and yet it's extremely popular, and it's an idea that doesn't die.
You have radical Marxism, cultural Marxism. You have the sexual revolution. And now you have Islamism. So those same three radical forces are powerfully in America. And in education, they've gaslighted American history. So many Americans no longer are proud to be American or have confidence in their history. You know, we are racist, xenophobic, imperialistic, and all the nasty things that are said.
It's just a big lie. And like I mentioned about the critical theorists, as Oz termed it, they gaslight you on your history. And that's true. They also, this is a Konstantin Kisin, who's another UK conservative, but they're going to get into, we're going to go over to America though. They have great stuff here. I hate the fact that I have to pass up so much great stuff. But I want to stay on task here.
To pursue the more practical side of renewal, I have decided to continue to the United States, to Washington, D.C., in order to meet with my friend John Stonestreet, whose whole life is dedicated to just that goal. John is someone who truly understands the times. In many ways, he and I are similar, although he has the advantage of youth. As president of the Colson Center, his mission is to equip people to live with clarity, confidence, and purpose, and with the lens of a Christian worldview. John has reached millions through his speaking engagements and his Breakpoint radio broadcast. He too has been called to think and write about where we have been, where we are, and where we are going.
Now, I have to interrupt here really quick because, first of all, he said, I want to go to America to get the more practical side of it, right? And then, and this John Stonestreet, I had never heard of before. And it says he's a writer and a speaker, right? And I'm thinking, where's the practical? What are you talking about practical? Now, I understand he is discussing, right, how to make these ideas practical to people and how to fight against Western civilization crumbling by asking really important questions, bringing these important questions into a person's day-to-day practical life. But I think that this does present a conundrum for a lot of people. one of the reasons I focus on culture, and specifically culture building and culture creation, is the fact that I find that, how do I say this? Focus on the Family, the Colson Center, a lot of these think tanks, right, are about dudes talking about stuff. And I mean, sure, here we are talking about stuff, right? But, and it's true, they made this documentary. So I'm not saying that they're not doing things. I'm just saying that often when they're teaching people, they're not necessarily teaching them what to do. They're teaching them how to think properly. And they're also not necessarily teaching kids how to grow their projects, right? Or how to actually achieve. They're teaching them to think properly, right? And so a lot of intellectuals have to remember life is not about reading a book, writing a book, and thinking about things properly. Life is about going and doing things. And you'll find out who your friends are really fast. Not when you write a book and you hand them a book and go like, I hope you enjoy my book. No, you'll find out who your friends are really fast when you try to do something that's hard. And you might need support or you might need help to do that thing. And that person is often not going to help you to do and accomplish things. And that's how you know who your friends really are. Action and rubber hitting the road is what really reveals the real men, right, who are going to change society. A lot of these young guys, they need help to actually accomplish things. They don't need people just giving them 5 minutes of advice and being like, have a good life, right? Like, I think we even talked about this, Rebecca, where it's like that verse, don't go to someone and say, oh, be filled and have a happy life and bye, when you don't fill that need. If you're not filling that need and helping them with a meal or with a little bit of help that they need to accomplish something, right, to live day to day, that is a vain statement to give them some kind of advice, and be like, like, good luck, bye. That's, I see that in the church happening all the time, and not a lot of practical help. So when Os Guinness was saying the more practical side of it, that was what my mind went to. I'm thinking, you know what? If you really want the rich answers, like, I'm not saying these guys aren't doing a great job. Again, once again, they made this film. They're doing great stuff. They have a study for Trith Rising, which is really great. They put that together. But guess what? When you do the Trith Rising study and you find somebody actually wants to accomplish something in that study as a response of this documentary and this study, that is exactly the point of this whole thing. It's not just to have a discussion and talk and think about society. It's to get someone so inspired that they want to do something. And that's real stuff. So what we need is people who are willing to give support to someone who has a vision and wants to accomplish something. And I think that's really admirable. I think we need more and more of that. Just my 2 cents on what is practical. What is more practical? It's the people who are brave enough to go like, I need help. I'm going to do this thing. Hope I don't step on your toes, but I'm inspired by this and I want to accomplish something. That to me is really cool. So we need more of that. But and it's nothing against John Stonestreet. I don't really know that much about him. I plan to listen to his Breakpoint radio program at some point, but yeah, and he does seem to talk about culture. So hopefully I'd love to check on his theories about it and see if our theories line up with his. That would be exciting.
As Oz says, the renewal of a civilization doesn't involve just the powerful. Renewal begins when believers everywhere embrace what's true and have the courage to act.
Yep.
Chloe Cole grew up in Central California.
Hey,
Like so
look,
many young people today, Chloe struggled with her identity.
Chloe Cole.
And like so many young people today, she sought comfort and companionship online. But what she found there were harmful ideas about who she is.
Yeah, she's going to give her testimony. It's very powerful. It's great. It's also tragic and unbelievable in places. If you guys aren't aware, we interviewed her recently, and then also I think Seth Dillon of the Babylon Bee talks as well.
You know, these rules about what you can and can't joke about. It's not just misinformation. There's topics that you can't make fun of. They're trying to safeguard people by protecting them from humor. USA Today published a headline about how Rachel Levine had been named their pick for Woman of the Year.
This was the tweet that they got in trouble for when they said that Rachel Levine was honorary man of the year in response. And X at the time was not owned by Elon Musk. They told them that they had to remove the tweet or be banned entirely, and they stood on principle. And then Elon Musk bought Twitter and brought them back. So that was, you know, these are case studies, right? Seth Dillon, Chloe Cole, and there's a few other people as well. The guy who was sued for not making a cake for a gay couple. That's like a decade-long story by now, I think. But thank God he won that case at the Supreme Court. It's so surprising that it had to go to the Supreme Court just to do that, isn't it? Like, it couldn't figure that out in a lower court. It takes brave people like this who are willing, not necessarily willing to suffer, but yeah, they're willing to suffer for the sake of the truth. That's what we see a lot in our society now, because the individual's running roughshod, right, over the system. To sum up this documentary, I'm going to go back a little bit. There's a lot more, by the way, in here. I think people will really enjoy seeing more here. And it's definitely worth talking about. There's also this lady who does a blog about defending children, which is pretty cool. But I'm going to go back. Earlier on, some really cool things were said about how we can make change. And I thought it was very significant because it brings us to where we're at now.
Over the years, I have held countless conversations, both with individuals and with groups, on the topic of calling and how to engage with our modern culture. I'm always asked, well, that's all well and good, but what should I do about it? And of course, that's the hardest question to answer. And so on the individual level, what can any of us in our own lives truly do to encourage renewal?
There's an enormous temptation to say it was better before, it's going to the dogs now. And I'm going to get into that temptation completely. It seems to me that we are going to the dogs. The world is spinning out of control. Fundamental principles are being neglected. Democracy as a system or political arrangement is under ceaseless attack in the United States, certainly in large parts of Europe as well. There is a great deal of uninformed speculation about the appropriate forms of government, the appropriate limits of government. The only thing that I can see very clearly is that all governments, all structures of authorities have become profoundly weakened. Religious, moral, psychological, philosophical. They've just become profoundly weakened.
The West has a great deal of material prosperity, economically, militarily, culturally, all of these areas. The West is the biggest winner. But when it comes to identity, who am I? And what's the meaning and purpose of life? Why am I here? And what am I going to do with the rest of my life? What am I going to leave behind? The West seems to have dropped that ball. And they've done it in the most dangerous time for, I think, all humanity.
Yep. So that to me is the real question. We're trying to answer an identity question, but really we should be looking at the fact that we've been so blessed materially that if all we do is accept our identity in Christ, we could change the world. We could do almost anything we want. If all we do is accept our identity in Christ and our place in our community as someone who needs to love neighbor, Christ says the two greatest laws are to love God and to love your neighbor as yourself. And I can't find anything wrong with living that way. I just can't find anything wrong with that. We can criticize Western civilization. We can criticize our family. We can criticize our nation. But you can't criticize those two rules. There's just nothing wrong with them. If God is who God is, and he made you, and he made us, then he deserves some praise for that. Have you ever read a book and they say, praise for the author for writing this book? They're willing to give praise to an author for a little book, but you're not willing to give praise to the creator of the universe? So I think when we're willing to do that, when we're willing to be grateful and thankful enough for what God may have done for us, it can change your life. It can make you grateful, not just to God, but to those around you, to everything you've been given. And so, our friend here, that Berlinski guy who says, we might feel tempted to say that society has gone to the dogs, and I will give into that temptation and say, yes, it has gone to the dogs. If all we do is not to do that, not give into that temptation, and just be grateful for what we have, we're not going to be stuck running around in circles trying to find our identity in something that does not exist, something we have to invent, something Chloe Cole had to invent, right? And why do you think she did all those things and didn't feel satisfied? That's one thing she says here. She says she did all this work, all this surgery, and she still was not happy. And so she thought, well, I also have to do a mastectomy. Now I have to dig in more. Guess what? You're going to have to keep doing that. You're just going to have to keep doing that, and you still are not going to be happy. Because why? Instead of trying to answer that question through materialism, which you cannot answer, we should be answering the question of identity through our Creator, who gave us our identity, who gave us our purpose. And if all we do is read his book called the Holy Bible and take it at face value, the lady from Somalia, she had to go through a lot. She had to get a family. She had to go through AA because she was an alcoholic. And she said that it was profound realizing that
I was mocking people of faith with my atheist friends. And when we weren't making fun of religion, we were condemning religion because it was a tool for people who wanted power. I criticized the treatment of women in Islam. I criticized Islam's terrorism. In the meantime, The FBI is coming every so often to say this is active plot against your life. These people don't forget. It doesn't matter how long you live. Sooner or later, they'll get you. These are the thoughts that are going through my head, and it's really escalating. And then I met my husband and I had a family, and then I started to feel afraid that something I didn't have before in those years, now I had, and that would be taken away from me. But not only that, the fear, the sense of terror, the regret, the guilt, shame. And I was really, really afraid. And I just had this fire hose of negative thoughts churning in my head, not letting up. I became very unhappy. And I was managing these thoughts through drinking. It was a glass of wine, it was 2 glasses of wine. I would need more and more of it. I was really turning into an alcoholic. I was coming to depend on alcohol to manage the discomfort, the depression in my head. And I agreed to go to a rehab center. But when I get there and I talk to this wonderful therapist, she says, I really think what you're going through is spiritual emptiness. It's spiritual bankruptcy. AA has 12 steps, and step 1, 2, and 3 is this total surrender. And in that process, prayer, writing down the qualities of God, it just strikes me, this figure I'm describing is the figure of Jesus Christ. Then I decide I am going to pray to Christ, and something clicked. And I felt connected, and I felt as if someone was listening to my prayers. Just a sense of peace, deep peace and calm. And at that moment, I understood I'm not going to drink again. Something changed, something real, for me, very real changed, and very dramatic. And I felt reconnected with my husband, reconnected with my children. No more pills. I don't take any medication. I don't know how to explain it other than to say it is real for me. Life is so good. And it's a miracle.
I'm incredibly grateful that I've been given this purpose.
So that's what you find is purpose given to you, new, fresh purpose given to you when you're able to see things through Christ's purpose in you, right? When you're in Christ, you're able to then see your purpose. And this is the purpose that makes you joyful, makes you happy, makes you grateful. Even for all the things Chloe Cole, for example, was taken away from her, she's happy. And that's how it can be for all of us. We can be happy, even in all the things that were stolen from us and taken from us. You know, she had to escape Somalia and her family and leave her whole family, this lady here, because they were going to marry her off to somebody she had never met. She was like, this is just not who I am. Eventually, she claimed asylum, got asylum in the Netherlands, and said, I'm not a Muslim anymore. But that was just the beginning of her story. She then had to stand up and fight against these people who wanted to kill her. And she could have sank into a deep depression and realized nothing I'm doing is valuable, nothing I'm doing is working. But in all of that seeking for peace and for calm with alcohol, she ends up realizing, wait, I have a whole other purpose. And it's this purpose that gives us meaning, that it's this purpose that we really are seeking freedom. It's why we want freedom as Christians. That beauty cannot be found in government control, which is what Marxists want for us. They want to control everything we do. That's the purpose that they believe we need. So the government substitutes God's purpose for you and gives you a new purpose, which is materialistic. It's you have to work so that other people can have money, people who are poor and things like this. It sounds like a noble thing, but then you realize in order for that machine to work, people die in between the gears and they get killed, sometimes very mercilessly. And we already know that they've killed more than the Nazis. We have to recognize that culture is not just going to solve itself. And our society is not just going to fix itself. It requires all of us to believe in Christ's purpose for us, in Christ's mission for us, and being grateful for where God's put us right now so that we can make a difference. So I would say, watch this documentary, possibly even think about doing the Trith Rising Study at your church, and help people find their calling and purpose. This is truly how you defeat a civilization destroying force like Marxism. You have to consciously decide, you have to consciously act. We talked about a little bit about the practical. Os Guinness is like, he's really practical. And I'm like, wait, what are you talking about? Well, guess what? This thing entered into my brain, this idea of pietism. Remember we talked about pietism before? And the fact that, you know, during the Reformation, the Lutherans in Germany, what they wanted to do is integrate their faith into the day-to-day life. And they wanted to educate people in the Bible so they were never fooled again by these ideas that you have to be legalistic, you know, that you have to be in a church that's legalistic, because this isn't just about Catholicism, right? And saying, hey, that was done incorrectly. There's a 95 thesis I'm going to nail on your door, right? No, it's not just about that, right? It's about reform in general, and reform has to come when our churches become legalistic. They're no longer about the real gospel and the real faith, right? The true religion, pure religion, which is to visit the orphans and the widows and to stay unspotted by the world, right? This is what Christ says. And so pietism, the funny thing was, there's many people today who speak against pietism. And I understand what they're trying to say. They're trying to say, listen, don't give in to legalism. Don't become one of these fake culty churches that are like, or these prosperity gospel churches that are like, you have to be a super good Christian by wearing the right clothes and doing the right things and eating the right food and doing this is how you can prove you're a great Christian. And if you don't do those things or you're not good enough, sure, that becomes very paint by numbers. It becomes very formulaic. It becomes very culty, right? And it becomes literally what Christ was talking against and preaching against with the Pharisees, right? But guess what? Pietism created movements like the Puritans. And the Puritans were willing to do enough work to create this country. They created this country, America. And they didn't do it by sitting around. They did it by doing hard work. Now, true, maybe their motivation was off. Maybe they were trying to prove to their church, hey, look, I'm going to be doing a lot more praying and fasting than you are, or whatever. Sure, we can all say that today. We can all point fingers at the Puritans or these very pietistic sects of Christianity and say they are too concerned about the outward man, right? Not concerned enough about the inward man. Are you really saved? Do you really have assurance of faith? And if you do, then move on. Don't worry about it. Don't be legalistic and pietist. Don't be too much concerned about. Well, frankly, we could use a little bit of that today. Frankly, we could use a little bit of James and going, no, it's not enough to just say you're a Christian and go to church every Sunday, right? And oh, I don't have to wear a tie now. I'm not pietistic. I can wear a t-shirt. Does that make you a better person now? It's almost a reverse pietism. It's almost like I can be a relaxed Christian. I don't have to, I'm not one of those pietistic people. Well, guess what? It is not just gushy. Our faith is not just a mushy gushy faith where like I'm good with Christ, therefore I don't have to do anything. Right? Christ says, if you love me, follow my commandments. Yes, you shouldn't be going to your church and being like, did I do enough this week to get a gold star from you? Sure, right? But guess what? These days we could use some of those people. We could use some of those people being like, do you need anybody to fill up your food pantry? Do you need anybody to do this? Do you need anybody to do that? Pietism, the problem with pietism was never, oh, you're fasting and praying too much. The problem with pietism is it turned into legalism, right? It turned into prosperity gospel stuff, where it was only about the outward man. It was only about Pharisaical things you could do in public to look good, right? It was only self-help book stuff to make yourself feel good about yourself. But that's not how it was with the Puritans. They really wanted to have a more pure relationship with God. They really wanted that. And they were willing to suffer for it. Suffer. Not hang out with flip-flops and t-shirts. They thought suffering was part of life. And so, you know, when they talk about the practical application of your faith and your purpose and your calling before God, well, a lot of people, funny enough, don't wake up in the morning and go, God called me to suffer for 20 years in a desert or something. Ironically, you don't usually hear that, do you? Isn't that funny how that works? But what you will hear is a lot of kind of like, I want to be like my pastor, and I want to have a nice car, and I want to do this, and I want to do that. You'll hear a lot of that stuff, right? Well, what we need more of, though, is a little bit of piety and a little bit of somebody who cares about the real stuff that made this country great, which really is sometimes really hard work. And it's not about someone getting accolades. It's the fact that it's a private piety. It's a private work that you're doing before God. Sure, if you do all these things to be seen by men, that is the kind of pietism that we shouldn't be pursuing, right? But I think, frankly, we have almost a reverse pietism today. A reverse kind of, it's so evangelical and so relaxed that we're not even willing to do work, because if we were to do work, then we're trying to do works unto salvation or something. And this is just a category error, right? And it's true, a lot of people get this discussion correct. They understand that another one of the problems with pietism was that people were trying to earn their salvation, essentially, right? Because they didn't have an assurance of faith. But I think if what we do is we really study the scripture enough to know that these are two different things, right? There's salvation, there's sanctification. There's maintaining your faith afterwards. And I think if you're actually trying to maintain your work for the right motivation because you love God, then do more. Keep going. Please God with your works. Make God happy, because that's what it's about. It's not making your fellow church member happy by that. It will do that probably. But it's not really about that. It's about your private relationship with God, and the kind of stuff that the Bible is showing you is already a good work to do. Taking care of the widows, taking care of foster kids, taking care of the fatherless, and staying unspotted by the world. Loving your neighbor as yourself. If that's pietism, sign me up. Right? We need more of that.
Christianity is a relationship with God through Christ.
Amen.
And it seems to me that piety might be the practice of that relationship.
Yeah.
Like, for instance, if you are dating someone and you get engaged, you want a good practice would be to not date anyone else.
Yeah.
Or a good practice would be to appreciate that person you're engaged to, spend time with them, talk to them, not just say, well, I've got the ring, I'm engaged. It's all good. I don't need to do anything. Now it
Right.
doesn't matter what I do now. So it seems to me that that is maybe the definition of piety is the practice of the relationship or the agreement with God and what he's already accomplished in you and done in you, that, in Hebrews it says that we have been made holy and that we have been sanctified. And so perhaps piety is agreeing with that and
Yeah.
saying, oh, so if I am holy and I am sanctified, then there's a certain way that I behave now. Like so many times in the letters and the epistles, it says things like, let your gentleness be known to all, and let these character qualities come out of you, rise to the surface. Let the fruits of the Spirit come out of you and be revealed in just your daily life. And so without it, we're just saying, I don't have to do anything. So there's
Yeah.
nothing that's needed. There's nothing that's needed, which,
Right.
God's salvation, like his love is unconditional. So, I can see why someone would say that. But if our spouse's love is unconditional, we don't just take our spouse for granted.
Amen. And I think also a lot of my issue with the complaints about pietism is that I think there's a historical context there. Because when you're talking about relationship with God, you're talking about kind of a deep internal desire to please God authentically. And my belief is that when you look at the historical record of pietism, before even the Puritans, when it was in Germany with the Lutherans, their intention, and by the way, what they did was amazing because they introduced like a new concept of the Bible study and small group Bible studies. Like people didn't do that before. That was like a pietism thing. And now we have that in churches everywhere, as we should. And so, yes, pietism can go to the extreme, right? Where you're saying you have to do these minimum things in a church, otherwise you're not a Christian. That can go to an extreme. But Luther was not trying to say, if you have a Bible study, you're a Christian. If you don't, you're not. That's not what Luther was trying to do. The pietists that came after that weren't trying to do that. But today we've confused legalism with pietism. And we've confused the idea that these pietistic people were a lot more pious than us, and therefore they must be a little far off the deep end. Right. And so we feel bad about it. These people were fasting a ton and getting a lot done and founding our country. They're too busy founding our country to care what you think about them. Today, though, we think that that's a bit extreme. Why? Why do we think that's extreme? That's just caring about God and your relationship with God. So, it's true that pietists and people did complain about the pietists eventually because they were what's called too heavenly for earthly good eventually. And in that effort of being so heavenly, right, they actually lost at some point their eye on the ball, which was to actually care about your neighbor, to actually care about the things that mattered, to actually engage, right, in reality with the praxis of your faith and act it out. There were people, later on, funny enough, the people who are called pietists today, which are Pentecostals and people like this, ironically, these were the people who had an issue with the too heavenly minded for earthly good. So, if we're really looking at the history of it, these things are a lot more complicated than just, oh, those are pietists over there. What happens to every movement is eventually it loses the mission. You get mission creep, and the pietists, the original pietists, right, formed great denominations, went to the West, formed a whole new country, and maybe that was their purpose, and they fulfilled it. And now they've lost their purpose. And so new denominations arise to fulfill that purpose and the needs in society. But at the heart of it, pietism was not bad. It was not a bad thing. It was good to have Bible studies. It's good to actually exercise your faith through your actions. And there's nothing wrong with, like, for example, baptism is an example of that. Your church will sometimes pressure you to get baptized. Oh, you're a Christian now. Do you really believe? Well, why don't you get baptized? Because that's an outward expression of your faith. Is that pietism? To pressure someone to get baptized? I mean, what line is pressuring someone? Is there a line there? Maybe you're pressuring someone too much. Now you're pietistic suddenly, right? Like, oh, stop being so pietistic. You're asking me to do something now. Well, yeah, it's a church, and we express our faith through our actions, not just by our claims. Not just, oh, I'm a Christian. Well, let's live it out now. Somebody said very recently, in delineating, right, legalism from authentic faith, let's not forget, he said, that it's very clear what the fruits of the Spirit are. It's right there in the Bible. So if someone's adding on to that and saying, no, you also have to have a nice car, and you also have to have a nice job, and you also have to have that. Well, yeah, that's a bit much. That's silly. But guess what? Love, joy, peace, and all these other things are very broad, and you can express that through a variety of ways, right? And so that's what we should be pursuing, and we should be expressing it in a variety of ways, right? Like there's lots of things: communion, baptism, foot washing, all kinds of stuff can express your love for your neighbor and your appreciation of fellowship with the church, with communion, for example. All these actions, right? They're not works unto salvation. That's absurd.
Well, they're also fun to do.
Yeah, they're great.
And satisfying to do. And they get you, they get your eyes off yourself and your own troubles and then on to someone else that needs more help than you do, or just on the Lord.
Yeah. And it feels like that's the kind of satisfaction that in the documentary, right, that a lot of these people were talking about when they found their faith. They found greater purpose in Christ's purpose for them and in helping others. and not concerned for themselves anymore and their own personal individual identity. They had already accepted their identity in Christ that he gave them, right? They're kind of their lot in life, right? Well, I have to fight. If I'm Seth Dillon, I have to now fight for my company. This is not a fight I chose. It's one I have to accept. But this is such a great identity. And so each of us has something to offer the church. We have a mission. We have something to do. And when you come into a pietist small Bible study in your church, which I hope exists, and people encourage each other in the Word to study and to learn about God, then guess what? God is going to give you impressions. He's going to give you an idea about what your calling is, what your mission, what you think your particular mission is. Some of those things are very practical and they show up very practically. Sometimes it's just thrust into your lap, right? Someone's in need and you see that need and you're the one who has to help them. And sometimes these things are very kind of things you have to think about. Like, God gave me this talent. God gave me this desire. But when I express it, it's not altogether clear how this can be used, right? And so you have to do some digging, some working, some prayer. And that's been true for me as an artist, right? So I deal with culture. We deal in culture. We deal in how culture affects all of these things, the myths and the stories that this kind of documentary also overlaps with. Characters like Chloe Cole, characters like Mahershala Ali, Winston Marshall, Konstantin Kisin, Seth Dillon, all these people, Os Guinness. These are all mythical characters, and they have a great testimony of the Lord. My job as an artist is to do things like this documentary, to do things like narrative films, to do things like other kinds of pieces of art that enlighten people as to the love of Christ, the beauty of Christ, the truth of God. I think we need more people like this. So we're raising up our daughter. Speaking of which, raising up our daughter, guess what? We got her book printed and it's exciting. And she puts in here the books she has planned for the future. Little value about her. So we're raising, as parents, our job obviously is to raise up our kids to do great things. We love being part of that. Rebecca made a little script we're working on the video to help promote this book. And a lot of other projects like this can happen if we help each other and support each other in the church. Hopefully we'll see if we can do a Trith Rising study as well. You never know. It might inspire some people to get involved.
Yeah.
So thank you, everybody. Let's stay attuned to what we can do for the culture. But if not, that's how the culture crumbles. Come on, guys. We don't want to do that. And where can people find you, Rebecca?
You can find me writing on Substack as Rebecca Croft, and you can also find me on YouTube as Rebecca Loves Jesus. Where can people find you, Jon?
Me too. I'm also on X and Substack and YouTube and stuff like that. And I'm also on MediaMoses.com. You can visit me on all those places. And I hope to do more Substack stuff in the future, but I haven't been doing as much recently. I've just put out my Q4 on Media Moses. Paid subscribers will be able to read that, what we're doing behind the scenes. Some cool ideas in there. But we got a lot of other projects as well in the works and hoping to get a studio soon. A lot of great stuff happening here. All right, folks. So have a great weekend. We love you guys. And remember to give a salute to the culture builder who makes life worth living. And love you guys. Have a great weekend.